You're right. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Meanwhile, welcome everyone to ThursdAI. Let me add here. Today is a special show. Since this is our first show of the year, welcome Wolfram. Say hi
Hi.
to the folks. Hey, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. 2025 is here. It's very exciting. So, welcome to ThursdAI. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Meanwhile, those of you who are joining us via the space, welcome to the show. Feel free to say hi to other folks here. Give us a little wave, a little Happy New Year heart reaction, etc. We're going to get started soon. Meanwhile, I will just tell you that today is a special show, as well as it's been a, Christmas and then New Year's. Not a lot of news. There's some news. Some interesting things to talk about. Compared to the last quarter and the last few weeks before the new year, nothing compared to that. And so, because of that, and partly because we want to look into the new year and explore some stuff, today is a special show. We're going to talk about agents and whether or not the 2025 is the year of agents. And we're going to have a special guest for the show. We're going to chat with Joāo Moura, who is the CEO and the creator of a very popular agent framework called CrewAI. If you haven't heard about Crew, well, we actually chatted with Joāo a year ago, actually on January 15th. So a year ago, and we're going to chat with him again about the state of AI agents. CrewAI has remained one of the most popular AI agent frameworks, and João is going to join us in about 30 minutes or so. Meanwhile, if you're joining us from Twitter Space, I would love it if you leave a comment and tell us if you tried. First of all, Happy New Year, folks. But also, tell us if you tried any agent frameworks, or if you have a favorite one. We're going to talk about those. Also, if you have questions for João, that would be a great time for you to drop questions here below. I will say that I see a reply from Dan Mac that says, totally thought it was a Monday until I saw the notification for the space. I feel you. This feels like a Monday. It feels so weird to do a ThursdAI a day after the holiday. Folks, it's not a Monday. It's a Thursday. It's a weekday. We're back on a regular schedule. I definitely feel you, but the show must go on. And so today is going to be a very exciting show. As always, I would love it if you folks give a little signal boost, a little retweet to the original space so that folks will see. And as always, I would like to say thank you to our co-host, Weave from Wits and Biases. This is the little square profile that hosts the Twitter space, so give that a little follow. And with that, I think I'll just put on a little music, and then we will get started in a few minutes. I think we'll get started in like 5 minutes or so. Wolfram, we'll do like a little recap, and then João will join us here on stage, where folks will be able to join and then leave questions as well. Meanwhile, the two questions I want you to answer while the music is on. One, if you've used an agent framework at all, what's your favorite agent framework of choice? And two, if you have questions for João, for CrewAI, leave us the questions that you would like me to ask João at the end of our interview. Meanwhile, we do have some updates about some AI stuff that happened in this weird week between Christmas and New Year's. And so there are some updates. So we'll see you here back in, let's say, 2 minutes. And then I'm going to put some music on because we have that. No. Alrighty, folks, just one more minute and we're gonna get started. Meanwhile, as I said, actually it's 35. Wolfram, let's get started.
Let's get started.
Yeah, I think it's time. All right, folks, it's time to get started with ThursdAI for January 2nd. And the way we get started is always the opening sound, the opening sequence. Let's actually do this. So, welcome to ThursdAI, and let's do it. Woo-hoo-hoo. Welcome everyone to ThursdAI for January 2nd, 2025, the first show of 2025, the first show of the second quarter of the century. How cool is that? The second quarter of the century. That's crazy. I saw Tim Urban from Wait But Why post his like crazy yearly things, and we're past the first quarter of the century. That's insane, right? That's crazy to think about. So welcome to the first show of this quarter of the century. A lot has happened. We're not going to recap the first quarter of the century, but a lot has happened. And yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome Wolfram. How are you, man?
Hey, I'm fine. How are you?
Good, man. Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New
Hopefully
Year,
you celebrated well. Happy New Year, everyone who joined us across everywhere. My name is Alex Volkov. I'm an AI evangelist with Weights and Biases. With me, my friend and co-host, Wolfram Ravenwolf, joining from Germany, all the way from Germany. How was your New Year's?
Excuse me?
How was your New Year's celebration?
Oh, it was very nice with the family. Nothing big, just some fireworks and yeah, having a good time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, as folks have been joining us, I will just tell folks that this is our first show for this new year, and folks are joining us. And since there's not been a lot of news for today we have a special episode. Today, we're going to talk about whether or not this year, the 2025 is going to be a year of AI agents, as many are predicting or have predicted or about to predict. And today we're going to be joined by a special friend, a person somewhat involved with agents, Joāo Moura, the author and the, I think, CEO of the company as well, of CrewAI, a framework, one of the leading frameworks, if not the leading framework of AI agents. Joāo is going to join us in a few to basically talk about AI agents as much as possible, to give us a state of AI agents as they are right now, but also to basically talk about kind of where they are still failing, what's still to look into, what's his favorite LLMs. Like, I'm gonna ask him all kinds of questions. So if you are joining us live, please feel free to use whatever tools you have available in whatever platform you're joining us on to leave questions for Joāo if you have questions. Meanwhile, we do have some updates, very small amount, but we do have some updates about some stuff. Wolfram, I sent you some of my updates as well, about some stuff that happened in the area of open source LLMs, and obviously main labs and folks have left and went on well-deserved holidays. The biggest update we had before we went on like a little break on New Year's as well from last year was DeepSeek dropping DeepSeek version 3, and that was incredible. But since then, it was kind of quiet. I like that the updates that I have, kind of two updates that I have from this week, was also reasoning. So it feels to me that not only agents, but agents and reasoning. That's how I think 2025 is going to be. I need to get used to saying 2025. I almost said 2024.
I think those two topics are interlinked because you need good reasoning for the agents to be able to do things autonomously.
I agree. I think
that's necessary.
I absolutely agree. I think that also one thing that we kind of expect from agents is for them to kind of run async almost, and that's also something that we've kind of started to get used to from reasoning as well. Where you in the chat interface, you kind of expect the answer to come as you're waiting for this, right? And in an agent, you kind of get used to like waiting for an answer to come at some point in, at some point afterwards autonomously. And also we've seen all kinds of Devons, etc. And we should probably talk about some reactions to Devon. I've seen people not getting very excited. All right, I think let's get started with the short TLDR. It's going to be very, very short. There's not a lot of stuff, but yeah, let's run through the stuff that I saw that we have, and then let's run through like a very, very quick thing, very short TLDR for this week. So the stuff that I noticed this week was one very interesting thing is from, I think it was from Tencent. It wasn't from Tencent, right? It was how I can't pronounce this, man. Huatuo GPT-01, a medical LLM designed for medical reasoning. So basically, it's folks that trained. I don't know why they named it after OpenAI's naming scheme, but they did train it on GPT, which I don't know if it's according to GPT rules. Basically, it's a open weights and open source medical reasoning LLMs, both in English and Chinese, that they have turned the reasoning model to reason across medical fields. And unlike reasoning over code and math, medical fields that have very specific verifiable answers, they tune that and they seem to have very interesting results. We can look into that. They have open sourced the data as well, which is pretty cool. And they did do some SFT fine tuning with OpenAI, which I don't know if that's quite according to OpenAI's rules, but that's okay. So we'll talk about this. One other thing that I noticed, a shout out to our friends from Nomic AI. Nomic have trained Modern BERT. If you guys remember the super quick, the folks from Answer AI trained a modern version of BERT called the Modern BERT with longer context and much faster. Basically, a drop-in replacement for BERT, which is the workhorse of the decoder only transformers, if I'm remembering this correctly. So basically, the workhorse of AI's system everywhere. They trained the modern version of that, and the folks from Nomic trained that with their embed systems. And so this is the first embed model on top of Modern BERT, and that performs very well. And so Modern BERT embed base was released by Nomic, and that's pretty cool as well. We can dive a little bit into this. I really want to talk with the folks from Answer. So Benjamin Clavy is going to hopefully join after his break. And I really want to talk about Modern BERT and how that was trained, because I think that's super cool at some point. And yeah, we're talking about the year of agents. Hugging Face released an agent platform, like an agent library called Small Agents. The Small Agents lib to build agents. That's pretty cool. So maybe we can take a look at that. Haven't tried any of this, folks. Like literally, I woke up today. Today was my first work day officially since the last time we talked, Wolfram. I think that's it on open source. Have you seen anything else in open source that's interesting?
Well, I saw some comments from Diego Guerra from AI at Meta, who said that not really news, but he said that we can expect some reasoning models and more releases of Llama 4 this year, and maybe that is the rumor mill. Maybe even in January, we'll see what comes out and when it comes out. But yeah, it's been a bit quiet about Llama. The Chinese have stolen all the attention with their models, so I think Meta has to release something big sometime soon, hopefully.
I reposted that, I think. And I think it's obvious that they're training Llama 4. What I noticed from that was, and we don't know if it's gonna come, so we don't do rumor mill here at ThursdAI, but it's obvious that Llama 4 is gonna come. What I noticed was interesting is that a person from Meta confirmed that they're doing reasoning, and I think it's going to be fairly obvious that 2025 is going to be the year of reasoning as well. And so it's very obvious that if DeepSeek gave us reasoning in the open with R1, I think have they released R1 in open? I don't remember, but definitely Quill gave us R1. And so reasoning is going to come to open source, and Meta is going to drop a reasoning model, and that's going to be insane as well. So we're going to get reasoning in the open, like we just talked with the medical one. We're still in the TLDR, so we're actually going to need to talk about all these things. The big companies, LLMs and APIs, there's a newcomer right now, just literally from today, I think. It's called Rubix, and they released a family of new AIs called Sonus. Wolfram, you just reacted to this as well. We just saw them, and they released a family of new LLMs, Mini, Air, and Pro, and also reasoning with the checkbox. I don't think that this reasoning is like, I actually don't know if like it's a model reasoning or something else. I don't know. I've tried it out. We can chat about this and maybe show this as well. I liked this one thing where yesterday Microsoft had a paper where that paper estimated the GPT. Did you see this? GPT-4o Mini was like 8 billion parameters, and they just like showed like a table of sizes. We can run through this, and I think it was all bullshit. Like, I don't know, like it looked like a hallucination.
Estimates.
People just clung to the fact that those are like people from Microsoft. Microsoft is a huge company. So the fact that a person works at Microsoft doesn't mean that they know what OpenAI has. But we can chat about this. And but the paper itself is pretty cool. And the last thing is, today it's all over my feed. Although it was fairly clear that that's going to happen. That Meta, like the company, plans to bring AI profiles to the social networks, and it's all over. Like, and it's been like, the glasses that I wear are Meta Ray-Bans, and I bought them at Meta Connect like last year. Meta Connect, they announced Meta AI Studio, wherein you create the characters that live on the Meta platforms. For some reason today, it's like all of the AI haters are coming out of the little, where they live under the floorboards, I assume they live. And they come out of the floorboards to hate on Meta because they cite this like dead internet theory, wherein the internet is going to be dead, and all of the entities that live on the internet are only the entities that are AI, basically. So those are the things. In this week's buzz, I basically nothing new. The two things that I wanted to tell you about is that we have the pre-registration for our evaluations course. It's free. It features Paige Bailey from Google. She's awesome. And then Graham Newbig from All Hands AI. He's also awesome. And you definitely should sign up if you're interested in evaluations. And if anything that I mentioned about evaluations is interesting, here I will add this link in the show notes to the course, and I'll add this also to the stage here as well. And that we have two kind of appearances, workshops. I'm going to be in San Francisco and in Seattle in 2 weeks. So that's going to be September. Where did it take September from? It's going to be January 11th and January 13th. 11th in San Francisco and 13th in Seattle. And I'm going to run the workshop in 13th in Seattle. So if you're interested in evaluations for LMs, join us. I'm going to be very happy to see you. I'm going to add those links as well in the show notes and in probably on stage somewhere as well. That's pretty much it outside of the interview with Joāo, who's going to show up very, very soon here, and with CrewAI. So that's pretty much it. Wolfram, anything else? I think that's pretty much it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, pretty much it. So Happy New Year, folks. Happy New Year. Folks who are showing up also on YouTube, we have some folks. And then I think let's start with open source. I think like not a lot of stuff, but let's start with open source because we have open source. Open source AI, let's get it started. With open source. So, and I think that like Wolfram, the first thing that we should probably open up with is, I think is this like, I don't know, would you pronounce this Joāo? How would you pronounce this thing?
Wait a second, it's Huatuo. In Germany, you would say Huatuo.
Huatuo GPT. Huatuo GPT. Yeah,
I don't know.
So I think it's very interesting. Two things very interesting about this. Huatuo GPT, not hot to a girl, sounding similar. Huatuo GPT 01 from Freedom Intelligence, a Chinese company. They have an X. Let me take a look at their X. Chinese University of Hong Kong. That's where it comes from. Chinese University of Hong Kong in Shenzhen Research Institute. And they released this complex reasoning with LLMs model in the open source. It's a family of models, very interesting family of models as well. They released 2 versions in English. They released 2 versions in English only, and then 2 versions in English and Chinese with basically like a parameter, like 1 billion adapter on top of them with only Chinese. So like 7 billion parameters in English only, 7 billion and 70 billion, and then 8 billion and 72 billion in English and Chinese. And those are reasoning in medical fields as well. Let me just make sure that I'm adding our friend here to the stage. João, welcome, man.
Yo, yo, yo.
Hey.
You're joining us in the middle of our news recap. So, folks, welcome João to the stage. João, feel free to join our Twitter space as well, so folks will know and follow you to the Twitter space as well, separate from this. And we're going to continue, and then we're going to jump into the interview with João all about agents as well. So they have those like 4 basically releases: 7 billion, 8 billion with the additional adapter in Chinese, 70 billion, 72 billion. And what they actually do, they also released the data set on top of which they trained this model with reasoning. And this reasoning, unlike the reasoning models that we've seen that specialize in code and math, which is, and Wolfram, we've talked about this. The reason why reasoning is very clear, why they specialize in code and math, is because the way to train these reasoning models is to use RL, reinforcement learning. And they use reinforcement learning for these models because they need verifiable ways to train those models during the RL method. And code and math is very easy ways to like run verifications on top of. And so these folks found verifiable methods in medicine. And they actually open sourced the data as well. So that's very interesting. That's one thing I love. So the data set is also there. And kind of looks like this. I can actually walk through some examples. It's actually pretty cool.
I think it's a good next step if you consider math and programming, which is on top of that. So medical stuff, yeah, it's also a lot where you need a lot of reasoning. But of course, it's also, if you make a mistake in a program, you get a program error and you can debug it. If you make a mistake with medical stuff, well, the patient has to find out. That could be a little more problematic.
100%. And I think that generally, like, our advice here on ThursdAI is don't trust LLMs for your medical stuff, but definitely also don't trust the advice of one doctor. I think that's generally accepted, that second opinion in doctors is like a very good thing for you to do as for your medical practice. Many folks are doing the thing where, like, if you have O1 or even O1 Pro, dump everything that you have. If you want to trust your personal data, that's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But if you have a medical doctor that you want to trust with your stuff, fine. But if you want second opinion, absolutely go and send it to O1 if you're okay with like trusting OpenAI with your medical stuff, and have a second opinion from LLM. Many folks have caught like their doctors like mistakes with this, or they came to the doctor more prepared with that as well. And so like this could help you to have like a support, for example. So
it will be interesting how many doctors are using the LLM.
Yes, well. That's absolutely.
I think
true.
That number will grow,
and I think it should grow, yes. So verifiable stuff, though, like verifiable things in this data set. So this is a very interesting thing. We're looking at the data set of how this reasoning model was trained, and they have like open-ended verifiable questions. So they have questions like, here's an example of a question. Let me open this up. 88-year-old woman with osteoarthritis is experiencing mild epigastric discomfort and has one. Oh my God, should I read all of this? I don't know. Has vomited material resembling coffee grounds multiple times. Considering her use of naproxen, what is the most likely cause of gastrointestinal blood loss? And the ground true answer, they have like a second thing, which is like a ground true answer, gastric ulcer. So this is like a verifiable direct answer to this question, and they have 40,000 of those trained. And so this is a perfect example of like a reinforcement learning data set that they've trained this reasoning model on top of. And then this is an example of how they trained this reasoning model for this Haotao reasoning model. So pretty cool. So it's going to be very interesting that what other verifiable fields we're going to get to see from reasoning models, and yeah, kind of like it. I will defer to our other co-host Nisten from the like focus on medical fields. Once he comes up, we'll talk about how this performs against, because they're medical benchmarks like MedQA and like different ones. I haven't seen any actual benchmarks for this. Probably they have some in the paper. But if folks are interested, the paper is up on GitHub, and they actually open sourced everything, including data. The one thing that I did want to mention, Wolfram mentioned this in the beginning a little bit, that they open source the data and the fine tuning data, the SFT data in stage 1. They literally mentioned this on GitHub that it was generated using GPT-4o, including complex chain of thoughts, right? So like for reasoning models to be trained on reasoning as well, we know this, like you need to generate chain of thought reasoning, so the model will start doing the chain of thought itself. And they literally mentioned we did this with GPT-4o, which is kind of against the terms of use of OpenAI. So, you know, you probably shouldn't or possibly wouldn't be able to use this model in production if you're a company. But hey, it's open source and it's cool and you should use this, but you maybe don't necessarily use this as a production tool. Right, moving on. Anything else we should talk about this open source reasoning model? Besides the fact that more reasoning models is cool, and maybe, yeah, I think that's it.
I haven't looked at it. Is it doing graphics as well? So you can upload an image of a CT scan? There was something in the data set about CT. So I guess that is a necessary component.
I haven't seen if it's multimodal. No, I only saw a brief thing. I haven't seen if it's multimodal, but yeah, it should, like it would be. Yeah, I think it's a good idea for those models to be multimodal. Haven't seen it. Take a look. Right, so they have quite a few of those. So this is not a new one. This is only the new reasoning one. So they have they haven't, like, this is a series of medical models for a while. They have like a bunch of citations as well. Pretty cool. So shout out to the folks at Chinese University of Hong Kong, and we'll see how this continues. All right, folks, I think that we'll just run through the other. No, we mentioned the other stuff. I don't think there's anything else to dive into before the interview. We're coming up in the interview with Joāo. He's already here. The one thing that I'll mention, like in accordance, because Joāo is here, is that Small Agents from Hugging Face was just released, and it's very interesting in the context of like our conversations as well. So maybe we'll chat about this as well. And
definitely caught my attention as well, because that is very interesting. The approach they are going with programming instead of JSON to call the tools, and Hugging Face as a backing part where you can upload some stuff. Sounds interesting. I only looked at the news and the blog post, but it went on my check out further list.
Yeah. So definitely we'll check out further and we'll talk about this. I think everything else is small potatoes, and we mentioned this in the beginning. All right, folks. I think it's time for us to do an intro and a conversation with Joāo. Wolfram, thank you. We'll dive into the conversation, and all right, it's time for an intro, and I think I'll start. Let me just start with this. So, here we are at the beginning of 2025, and where we, at least the reviews that I did for asking people what they expect from the year 2025 in AI, many folks mentioned reasoning. Obviously, reasoning came and chain of thought came, etc. But many also folks mentioned that finally agents is going to come, and I met agents with AutoGPT blowing up like crazy, and we're already doing ThursdAI. AutoGPT, I think 2023, somewhere like around like maybe April, May of 2023. Toran put the GPT on the loop and then exploded on GitHub, and then I think AutoGPT was like one of the main, I think, one of the fastest growing GitHub projects of all times, and got to like 100,000 stars, maybe one of the first, or like the fastest one. And so basically this kind of kicked off the idea of like running LLMs in loop, and kind of kickstarted the agents part. And since then there have been like a bunch of other frameworks as well. It started being very interesting, and fairly quickly folks found that it isn't quite necessarily working as expected. After a while, many other frameworks came about, like Baby AGI from Yohei, etc. And after a while, a newcomer came to the scene. And I remember specifically talking to João. I think we talked in January of last year as well. So I want to welcome to the stage Joāo Moura, the author of CrewAI. Welcome, João. How are you?
I'm
I'm
doing
doing
great.
great.
Another day in
Day in
paradise.
paradise.
Thank you for
Thank you for
having me. And
having me.
yes,
And yes,
feels like it's forever
forever
since last
since
time that
last
we
time that we
chat,
chat.
and it was a lot of fun. I think between building CrewAI, turning it into a company, being able to accelerate sales, and now going in 2025, I think this year is gonna be insane. Honestly, I was talking to some folks like a couple weeks ago, and they're asking about expectations for 2025, and I was like, it's either gonna be great or insane because like this is definitely happening, and I think even looking back during the holidays, I was kind of like pulling some numbers out of like CrewAI and agents and everything, and actually like on December 31st alone, we ran over kind of like 500,000 agents on that day. And on that final week was like over 4.9 million agents. Was yeah, it is insane and like how things are gearing up.
So we'll get to the fact that you just mentioned like some crazy numbers, right? Like we'll get to those numbers as well because I want to understand that like a Crew is a platform, Crew is a framework, Crew Crew is a collection of agents. Like I want to understand all these things. But João, first of all, I want to hear about you, who you are. Folks may have remember you from a year ago when we talked. It was January 15th of 2024. You were fairly a newcomer to the AI scene. Maybe you were like tinkering at home. And then you were doing some stuff at, I believe, Clearbit before. I want to hear about who you are. And first of all, please feel free to introduce yourself as the way you introduce yourself now and what's your background and like how you come into the world of AI.
Sure. So my name is kind of hard to pronounce. I go by Joe. That makes my calls a little
I don't want to
easier.
call you Joe. No, it doesn't work for me.
So my the way that you would pronounce my name in Portuguese would be João. There is like it's almost like a French je ne sais quoi in there or something. But yeah, that's kind of like how I go by. And basically, I have been in tech for close to 20 years. Have been doing a lot of JavaScript, ActionScript, Visual Basic back in the day, then spent a bunch of years doing Ruby, work my way through small consultancies, startups, and then got to be CTO at a startup throughout my career and started to basically work for companies overseas, mainly in New York and the Bay Area. And joined Clearbit, where I spent 5 years basically leading their enterprise product and other AI initiatives, all the way to the acquisition by HubSpot. And then after the acquisition and basically being there for like 5 years, I was like, all right, I'm ready for something else. I was already working on CrewAI as an open source framework, and that was taking off. People like were using it. I remember I would go to kind of like these meetups in the Bay Area, and I would meet random people from like Oracle, and they would say, hey, we're actually using CrewAI in production. And I would run into all these other like big companies that are kind of like using this. And as they start to reach out to me and say like, hey, we actually need some help with this and that, can you kind of like help us out? It became very clear to me that that wouldn't be sustainable as an open source project. I was like, all right, the open source is cool, but if I need to support this at this level, I need to be a company. There needs to be money involved into it, and that's kind of like how CrewAI became a company, and then we built an enterprise offering. And today, a lot of our time is split between open source and enterprise, and making sure that we're keeping things kind of like up and running. That would be the TLDR, I guess.
That's a great TLDR. I think somewhere in 24, didn't you also become a dad?
I did become a dad. I actually have a 40-day-old child now. Her name is Alice, and I gotta say it has been a lot of fun. Being a dad is extremely hard, so hey, I appreciate all the other parents out there.
Congratulations, man! Congratulations. So definitely, 2025 is going to be very exciting as well. So back to our kind of like AI area. I want to ask you about like agents. So obviously agents is very hot, and like you said, you have an enterprise offering. I hear,
Yep.
as we work with Ways and Bytes, we work like a bunch of enterprises as well. We start with folks building simple rack solutions, and then they notice that simple racks is maybe not enough. Can you talk about like from just the difference of what separates a simple rack solution that maybe calls a tool on its way to responding to a customer to something agentic? Like what creates, what makes a system agentic from where you sit right now after all this year plus or that you work on agents?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the end of the day, when you're doing RAG, what you're trying to do is you're going to optimize contexts that are being sent to LLMs. Right, that's kind of like it. You're selecting the most relevant context, and you're gonna do the you can do so many things with RAG, right? You can fine tune your own embedding model, you can do re-ranking, you can do everything in between, and you get the context that you need, and then you can make an LLM call and making sure that you're passing the most relevant information. With agents, what you're doing is the AI is actually controlling the flow of your application. What we're seeing out there depends a lot of the use case. For use cases that require more agency, you want to basically delegate the control to the AIs entirely. So the AI is going to decide when to use a tool, when not to use a tool, when to do something and when not to do something. But then on certain use cases where you want to have more precision, then you kind of like use a feature that we call CrewAI flows, where you can have more programmatic control. You can use regular Python to dictate kind of like what events are going to happen and if one thing is going to trigger other, and you can have agents kind of like do specific things where you require more agency. So the definition I think remains the same. Like I think agents are apps that have agency, right? They're AI apps that have agency where the AI is actually controlling the flow of the application. They're not kind of like nodes, they're kind of like being programmatic routed. That is an AI app, but there has no agency. So that's kind of like what we're seeing out there. Certain use cases require more agency, other use cases require more precision with flows, and then there's everything in between. Like there's a bunch of different ways that you can mix and match things. But it's very interesting to see how people are using this, because RAG kind of help with certain use cases, right? It helped with like customer support, helped with certain things. And what agents are going off for the enterprise, at least, is more automation, right? Automating internal processes, automating back office, automating parts of coding, automating parts of marketing, parts of sales. So all those different processes that these big companies have that now they can have agents do for them.
So would you say that something like more than one action is considered an agent, or is it even more than that? Like it's even in the area of decision making to an extent?
I think it's the area of decision making, right? If the AI is actually deciding when to go left and when to go right, when to use a tool and when not to use a tool, then you have agency. This is actually an agent. So you could have a simple agents, right? They're gonna do like simple things, but they need to have like a set of options they're gonna be choosing from and kind of like iterating from. So that's kind of like would be my definition.
Awesome. How did that definition change for the past year? Did it change for the past year?
I think it changed the way that I articulate about it. Change it. I think that evolved a lot, right? Especially because if you think about, go back a year ago, people were talking about agents, but it was definitely not as hot as it is right now. So now I have done hundreds, if not thousands of calls where I have been talking about agents. So the way that I talk about it can like have been put to the test, and I got to understand kind of like what works and what doesn't work depending on the audience. So the way that I articulate about it changed a little bit, but I don't think the definition necessarily changed it. In the end of the day, agents for me was always about the agency. For me, if it's a regular flow where you're calling AI, I find that hard to call that an agent. I think there's an AI application, and there's many of those, and I think there's a lot of room for that. But for me, agents in the end of the day is like the AI needs to be taking the control of what is happening to some extent.
All right. So in the context of, so we know the definition of agents. Let's talk about the definition of Crew. There's CrewAI. There's Crew as a product. There's Crew maybe as a company. There's Crew as a framework. Let's break it down for us what is Crew? What is CrewAI? I want to hear about like all of the breadth of the things, so that the audience knows what what we're talking about when we're talking about it.
I love it. Yes. So CrewAI is a name of the company. So the company is called CrewAI, and it supports a framework that goes by the same name. That is an open source framework called CrewAI as well. This open source framework allows you to build these agents, and you can build basically three different flavors if you want to think about it. You can build individual agents, you can build crews where you have multiple agents working together, and you can build flows where you can use regular code with agents kind of like working, and where you can have like a lot of precision and accuracy on what is happening on those flows. So there's basically, those are features within the CrewAI framework. So there's a lot of people that are building with the open source framework, and they're building these agents out there and running them and put them to the test. Now, we also have a product that we call CrewAI Enterprise. So that is basically a version of the open source that has a set of new features, plus a platform that allows you to build with no code, deploy, monitor, train, get metrics, assess the quality, set alerts, control access, approve ideas, share ideas. There's a set of features that goes into that platform that is very geared towards implementing this on enterprises, right? So while the open source, you can build whatever, and you can definitely build a lot of the features that you have on enterprise, that would take you a lot of time to get all those things figured out and get this running. On the enterprise, all that is pre-built and ready for you to run with.
That's awesome. So platform, framework, company, incredible. I have a question from the audience, like super quick, which I want to hear, because you have a company to run, and I think we mentioned this previously, but I want to kind of return to this. Especially as we look at 2025 and agents automating pieces of, I don't know, hopefully companies, but processes, etc. How many agents? let me ask you in the jargon that you just defined. So João, like a very simple, straightforward question: how many crews does Crew use?
I actually have this open right now. Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right now on one of our main accounts, the one that has the most, we have 13 crews running nonstop 24/7.
Could you tell us some of the, like, maybe less like proprietary techie stuff, like what examples of crews do you guys use, and what do they automate and help you with in the running of the company?
So let me tell you one that is kind of like for me is a little mind-blowing. It's a little bit proprietary, but I think it's okay to share, and then I can tell you about some of the ones that everyone already expects us to use.
Yeah.
So we actually have one that is called onboarding user enrichment crew. Whenever someone creates an account in the platform, we have agents that are going to use an initial questionnaire that this person answer, and goes out researching everything about this person and the company, and then draws correlations using proprietary data that we have on what would be great use cases for not only this company, but for this person and specifically, given this person's role, this person's goals, what has worked for others. It kind of like creates this understanding of like how this person should be using AI agents and should be using CrewAI to the most optimal level that would serve them and their company. And that data then becomes basically like we convert that into structured data, and we push that into the platform. And a lot of their usage is customized given this initial research. So, for example, we have a feature that allows you to build with no code. And sometimes, like when things work pretty well, customers are like, damn, like, how does it understand so well what I'm trying to do? It's because this no code like UI was pre-fed with information about you, your company, what you might be like, what your goals might be, what you're trying to accomplish, and all that. So this is kind of like a more in product crew But then we use for like all the other use cases. Like we have crews that help us with email, with support tickets, preparing for a meeting, create content idea, that can take phone calls, that can do PR reviews, that check our AWS infrastructure for security flaws, that checks support tickets, generate use cases for customers. Yeah, there's quite a few in there.
That's quite incredible. I want to break down some of these. How let me ask you like a very like another straightforward question. What is the most long running crew that you have? Like one that you've created like a long time ago and then, like it's still running?
Non-stop. I think this onboarding crew is probably the one that is running non-stop. We have a few that we run kind of like ad hoc. We used to have one early days around like January, last time that we talked like a year ago. We used to have one that would help with marketing, like content creation.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we still use that crew, but it's more ad hoc when we're kind of like we're trying to create specific ideas or specific pieces. Back in that day, like we're using that like every day, multiple times a day. But now it's like not that. That would probably be the oldest one that has like over a year old. I think I first run that on October 2023. So almost a year and a half, I want to say, like our close a year and 3 months, a year. Yeah.
All right. Do you have any crews that you use in your personal life with parenting?
Oh, not parenting, not yet. I do am trying to get a crew to help me with my personal email. So that's kind of like one thing that I'm working on my spare time here and there. Just because my personal email kind of like got neglected a little bit with with everything going on the business. But yeah, that's one that I'm trying to do. And for the personal email, I want to make sure that I makes it extra special, right? So it's not only about like is not only about like being factually correct, about sounding like myself as well in a lot of the cases, and also surfacing things to me that I need to be kind of like personally involved in, and kind of like handling everything that comes with email, from like calendar and everything along the way.
So there's like a bunch of stuff that I want to like fork into, but let me talk about the surfacing stuff. So I had a chat with Dex from Human Layer, and you just mentioned surfacing as a human in the loop, right? At some point,
Yep.
you defined agents as like decision makers, but at some point, you, the human, want to make the decisions, or you want to be involved in the decision, and you want to make sure that there's a level of decision making that after which you want to define that level, and after which that level you want to be involved, and below that level you want the AI to be involved.
Yeah.
How do you define that level generally? How do you define this level with Crew specifically? How basically developers should think about those levels? How do companies should think about those levels? How do these tools exist? Could you talk about generally the concept of human in the loop where it comes to agents, practical examples of when humans get involved in companies, tools that are built into Crew, maybe other frameworks, maybe concepts about like humans in the loop as a concept as well. Would love to hear from you this kind of approach, because I know for a fact that people want control still. And as humans, we don't want to let go of control. We don't want to get replaced. We want these things to help us and not get replaced by these things necessarily. So would love to hear your thoughts about like this specific thing.
Yeah, I love it. Honestly, the companies that are being most successful in adopting kind of like AI agents, at least like from our customer perspective, are the ones that are kind of like framing this as kind of like promoting their employees to manager of these agents, right? So now they have these agents as a tool that they can use, but the person, the humans, is still responsible for packaging, presenting, like fact checking a few things, make sure that everything's all right, put a nice bow on it, and they're still kind of like responsible for the outcome in a way. But now that's another tool, similar like as a calculator, as a spreadsheet, or anything like that. So those are the companies that we're seeing that are having the most success adopting agents and are finding it to be less stressful with like the people that are now kind of like using these tools. So that is definitely one thing. Well, the definition of human in the loop for the people that doesn't know is kind of like during the execution of these agents, at some point you might want to get involved in the process of approving an action or giving directions or basically reviewing some of this work. And sometimes you want to do that at the tail end once that the thing has done, like has like already completed, and you want to double check it. And sometimes you want to do it in the middle of the process to make sure that any steps moving forward are operating on top of like the right basis, the right information. So depending on the use cases, we see different levels of human in the loop. Within CrewAI, I think from the early days, we had a feature that was kind of like, honestly, it could have been better on the early days, that allows you to basically set up like whenever my agents get to do this task, I want to specifically them to stop and ask me for feedback so that I can provide feedback on the outcome so far. Right now, we allow you to do way more than that if you want to the point where I think that humans should be always in the loop, right? There is moments where you want the agents to stop and wait, but you don't necessarily want that to be the only moment where you can give them feedback. So I think a lot about like looking back to kind of like Jira or Trello, right? Where you have cards where people are working with. And at any point in time, you can open up that card and you can leave a comment. And that person's going to pick that up. So we actually have a UI like that on the enterprise side where you have cards and you can open it up and now you're going to be about to deploy comments on it as well. So I think the idea here is humans should be always in the loop with these agents so that if you're tagging along, you can give them feedback along the way, but you should be able to establish a breaking point so that they stop right there and wait for you to kind of like interject a little bit.
So your idea is like, there's always the possibility of like looking and being able to pause. But are there methods of defining critical points or breakpoints or thresholds of decision making, and how's the interaction layer of those? Can the agent call me, Slack me, text me, WhatsApp me? Like where's the connection points to those?
Yeah. So on CrewAI, yes, you can set up a specific breaking point at the task level. And what that means for you programmatically is that can call a webhook. So that can call anything that you want. It can call a services. It can send you a Slack message. It can give you a call if you're using Twilio or something. So there's an element of kind of like integrating with an external service, depending on how fancy you want to get. But it's going to basically call an API. And this API can do anything, and these agents are going to wait for a response back before they keep working. So that's how you would insert a breakpoint in CrewAI specifically. And then if you're using flows, for example, where you can have more like precision, then in that you can do whatever is regular code if you really want to. So you can do anything that you want in there.
I see. Tell me this. So this is kind of like a complex question. Maybe let me try to simplify this as I verbalize the question itself. Do you see, after working with enterprises, after running crews yourself, do you see more success in crews that are running that have interactions with humans, where they pause and get more context and get approvals? Do you see, because we know like LLMs still hallucinate, right? Like even with reasoning, etc., they get better. They get better with RAG when they get additional context, but they still hallucinate. We still need humans to observe them, etc. Do you see overall, empirically, with some data, proven data, that agents run much better with folks who are interrupting in the middle? Is there a way to define this as a metric specifically? Are there like ways to evaluate this? Could you speak about generally like how do companies know that things are working on production well?
Yes. So I think we can pull numbers specifically around people that are using human in the loop. There's people that are not using human in the loop. What I can tell you from the interactions with these customers directly, usually it's way more common for people to do kind of like reviews at the end, kind of like implementations, because a lot of these companies, the way that they start is usually with internal processes that require like low level of accuracy versus kind of like a user facing automation. So something that requires, for example, 90% accuracy, 91% accuracy, 95% accuracy, that is more doable. And because it's internal, they're okay reviewing at the end. So not necessarily a human in the loop. And then once that you go into kind of like support use cases or things that are consumer facing, where you want to have 99.999% of accuracy, that's when we're seeing people actually start to using more human in the loop. And yes, if the humans are involved, the results are always better, right? Because you can course correct things along the way. That said, a lot of crews don't necessarily need it. A lot of the crews can like do well enough that you on the simpler use cases, again, on more complex ones, yes, you need to have humans in the loop. Like, we're not there yet, the models are not that great just yet, unfortunately, but I believe they're gonna get there eventually. But I can pull specific numbers on companies that are using human in the loop versus the ones that are not. Right now, adoption curve usually starts with kind of like low precision use cases, and then they go into higher precision use cases, and the higher they go, the more human input they want. And usually they basically use flows to do it, or they use this webhooks to do it, or they use programmatic callbacks, another feature that we have. Anything that allows you to give extra inputs to it leads to a better outcome.
I hear you. Okay, so Joao, just to like make sure that I can keep doing this podcast. Obviously, this is a Weights and Biases sponsored podcast, and the usual like slot that I do here for Weights and Biases is called This Week's Buzz, where I talk about weights and biases. And the tool that that I talk about usually is Weave. Weave is LLM tracing, and agents obviously is part of that as well, and observability and evaluation as well. I would love to hear from you with your experiences of how folks are actually doing evaluations, of how enterprises are evaluating those tools, how you guys are evaluating, how you're approaching evaluations. Would love to hear how that also evolved, because obviously evaluating agents on a simple task, evaluating agents on the execution of tasks. Would love to hear from you, like maybe of what you can share of how folks should approach evaluation from the get-go, what metrics should they evaluate on, anything that you can share with the audience in terms of like just like help us teach the audience of the importance of evaluation, the tactics, the metrics.
Yes.
Whatever you can share would be amazing here, because I personally believe it's very important.
It is super important, and you're on point. And honestly, to your point, like, you know this, I love weights and biases. I think like not a lot of people, because there's so much buzz on AI nowadays, and a lot of people are starting to touch on AI in the last like year or two. People don't know, but you folks are like OG AI, right? You have been around for a long while before AI was this cool. You folks were already around, and I happen to like know a few folks that work in weights and bias, and it has been great. All the interactions that we had with you all so far, it has been amazing. And I know that you folks have quite a few kind of like new products that you also have been building as well. I think there's a few different levels for measuring quality of the systems in productions. And I think this also is a good segue from your last question. So there's a few different metrics, right? You definitely need to measure something. Just deploying these things out in the wild just doesn't cut it, right? Like, if you're not measuring, you don't know if it's working, you don't know kind of like what kind of ROI you're getting and all that. Now, how you want to measure and how low you want to get depends a lot of different things. So you can add measuring on the prompting level, where you make sure that you're basically monitoring all your prompts and kind of like basically storing out data so that you can assess it, and you can use this eventually for fine-tuning an extra model if you want to, or something like that. So that is one thing that people are doing a lot, because it's something that they're already doing from just building the regular apps and all that. And that's something that Weights and Biases have a bunch of tools for, that I can definitely vouch for, and I'm seeing people in the community use it left and right. Now, once that you go into AI agents, you're also going to have to start track more high-level metrics that goes beyond the prompting, the latency, and all that. You want to track the actual quality of the responses, and there's a lot of people that are using LLM as a judge for that. Or you want to track like hallucinations that might be happening. And again, there's great papers around how you can use LLM as a judge for that. as far as I know, those are features that you folks don't have just yet, but you're working on as well. And I believe that you're going to have at some point. We also have some of those more high level like observability features on CrewAI Enterprise as well. But the one thing that I would say is that you want to track things. You want to track things to make sure that the effort and the money that you're putting into this and the time that you're putting into this is giving you a positive ROI. In the end of the day, this is the beauty of AI. A lot of people compare AI now with kind of like the internet with back in the days, and I think there's some merits. But honestly, for me, there's a huge difference. Like if you're using the internet back on the boom, like that wouldn't have impact on your bottom line. You wouldn't make extra money because you were online on day zero. There was no one else in there. But with AI, if you do it right, you can have an impact on your bottom line on your next quarter. And that's like true ROI that you can get. But the only way that you can measure and you can be sure that you're getting that on your company is if you're measuring and evaluating these things. So I would say, yes, you should choose your tool of choice in order to make sure that you're measuring this. I can definitely vouch for Weights and Biases for being a great one, but you want to make sure that you're measuring things.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but we absolutely have evaluations and LLMs just built in. You and I specifically haven't talked. You were super busy. We should catch up on the specific tool set. But to catch up on strategies, you said hallucinations. How do folks measure hallucinations? Is that like, especially when an agent is involved, agent is making a decision, there's like, you're like 7 steps in, let's say, the agent is making a decision in step 8 or step 9 in the chain of steps. Maybe let me ask you this, right? So like evaluating an agent versus evaluating an app. Could you talk to me about the differences in complexities and evaluations between agent evaluation versus like an app evaluation? Maybe can you focus on this and tell me what the difference is?
Yes, 1,000%. When you think about apps, like traditional apps, the way that we have been coding them for like decades, they are very, very strong typed, right? So, and what I mean by that, you always understand the data that is coming in, you understand the transformations that are happening, and you understand the data that is coming out. Like 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4. You understand what is happening there. With AI apps in general, but AI agents more specifically, it's way more fuzzy, right? Think ChatGPT. You don't know what the input is. It can be a resume, it can be a PhD paper, or it can be a cake recipe. So you don't know the inputs. You don't know the transformations and what is happening inside, and therefore you don't know what the output will be. So how do you test something that is this fuzzy? Well, you can do some fuzzing testing yourself. And that's kind of like where things start to getting like into the inception level, where you start to kind of like use agents to kind of like test agents and using LLMs as kind of like a judge. So let me see if I can share my screen real quick, because I think this is going to be one of those that is better show than tell.
Better show than tell, yeah. But let's make sure that we describe this to folks. But yeah, please show us.
Yeah. So in here, you have a set of metrics that we have on CrewAI Enterprise. Again, it's not as low level as the one that Alex and like mentioned that they will have in the Weights and Biases, but this is more like agentic focus metrics, right? And you can see in here things, for example, the quality of the output, and you can also have an hallucination score. Well, how are you getting the hallucination score? Well, we're using an LLM to assess what would be the output, but we also allow you to write programmatic checks that you could do that would double check if like this is like how I want to check hallucinations, this is how I want to check for quality. So you can build your own custom evaluator, but we have one, the full, that kind of like use LLMs as a judge to get you that.
So for folks who are listening, we're looking at a dashboard inside CrewAI that has a graph across time from November 2024 to all the way to December, and now probably going into January. And then we see a hallucination score, like it's ticking slightly up to like 1.3 from 1.1 to 1.3. And we can see a score kind of like fluctuating throughout time. And that hallucination score is based on defined metrics that a person like defined how to assess the evaluation based on another LLM judging whether or not hallucination happened.
Yes, exactly. And I think like if we look at some of the testing here, there's a task comparing GPT-4o Mini with Sonnet 3.5 for agents. So for folks that are not seeing this, we basically have a table with kind of like task score, execution time per model, so you can evaluate. And in this case, we can see that GPT-4o mini was beating 3.5 for this agent, but 3.5 was actually better in a couple tasks. So what we could do is we could have the agents that are doing those two tasks to run off Sonnet 3.5 while the remainder agents would still using GPT-4o mini. And if you scroll on the scores, you actually see the hallucination score and like why this came to be, right? So this was partially hallucinated. Why? And you can see the reasons behind it. And then again, we use an LLM here to judge the output and actually get like what is the hallucination that might be happening in there.
So another LLM, for example, would get kind of the question, maybe the RAG chunks that you would pull for that thing, and then the question would be something like, did the response from that other LLM include any of this included like information things, or it completely came up with an answer on its own, something like this, as a hallucination, for example.
It's kind of like that, but I can send you the paper. There's a entire paper on this that's pretty interesting that we worked based on, and it's pretty sweet. But yeah, it's exactly. So you have an LLM call in the middle that is assessing the context, the question, the expected output, and the actual output, and kind of like sanity checking everything.
That's awesome. And so one thing that I just want to highlight for folks who are listening as well is that one thing that where you focus specifically is, and maybe a segue to my next question is, you're constantly comparing between models. And in the case that you showed, like you compared the GPT 4.0 to Gemini 3.5, and agents, frameworks, and agents themselves are essentially almost detached from the underlying intelligence that are executing them. But sometimes those intelligences differ. And this is also one reason, and wherever I get pulled into like a workshop or an event talking about evaluation, this is something to highlight specifically, because this is what we basically offer as well. When you evaluate, a new model comes out, like a lot of like eager folks, they jump into, they come to the manager like, hey, Anthropic just released this. The human eval is like, 10% better. This eval score is better. That eval score is better. We should just replace. It's one string replacement. And no, like it can perform significantly worse. And even if the model is completely better across all metrics, it can perform worse because of your prompts, etc. So like if you're not continuously evaluating like what you just showed, then you can effectively ruin your application in production. And even if the model is better. And so like continuous evaluation is very important. And that's what we're trying to achieve. That's what Crew has built in, which is incredible to see as well. Here is my next question for you, segueing from this, is that what is, based on CrewAI, the best LLM of 2024?
Oh man,
for agents specifically. Let's say for agents specifically.
You want to put me on a tough spot here.
Empirically, based on numbers, you're not,
Well, I would need to actually. So we do have numbers. So this is interesting, right? And one other cool things about the enterprise products, because like we understand the scores and the models being used, even though if we don't know like what the agents are actually doing, right? Because that's proprietary information. So we don't know the actual prompts behind it when we're storing this information, but we know that maybe it's a support agent and it is using 4o mini and has a great score. When we look across the entire platform, we can kind of like help enterprises decide what models to use, right? So if they say like, oh, I want a support agent, we can definitely say like, all right, for support agents, the highest score is usually GPT-4o or something like that. So I can tell you that the most used model, and I need to make sure that I pull this right, but OpenAI is the most used provider. I can tell you that for sure. Open source models are a close follow though. So that is definitely something that is top of mind for us. And within OpenAI, I think if I recall correctly, 4o mini is the most used actual model. I'm running a query here right now, but this query takes a long time. So let's see if it's gonna it's gonna execute in
Interesting.
time.
For a mini.
Yeah, let me. I'm pulling it up. LLM provide.
Because I kind of came personally as well. I came from 2024, and OpenAI has incredible place, and obviously, like everybody expected, especially with the O3 stuff. We're gonna talk about reasoning next. But kind of the darling of 2024 for many folks was Claude Sonnet 3.5. That's the feeling that I got, that I left 2024 with, and I just wanted to hear from you as well. Like how does that perform compared to other ones? Obviously, there's like different places. It just for code, for example, for many developers, that's the model that people are like focused on. For many other reasons, O1 was great. Wanted to hear from you for agents specifically.
Yeah,
I'm assuming that for enterprises, let me just down this point. Assuming for enterprises and speed of execution and cost of execution and context window, like all of these things are coming into play as well when you're running agents, and so that affects things. Whereas like Claude Sonnet 3.5 maybe like slower and more expensive compared to like execution, and maybe that is some of the reasoning where people choose models as well, in addition to performance.
Yeah, I want to say Sonnet 3.5 is definitely one of the most used models. Like it's on the top 10 for sure. We ourselves are using it internally for anything that is code related. Like 3.5 is our go-to. Like there are no questions asked. Like even like I think in a lot of cases it even beats O1 in a lot of like the code kind of like questions that we might get. So for example, we have a crew that automatically review PRs for CrewAI. So any open source PR that you opens, you're going to see there's a comment from a crew of agents in there reviewing it. That is using a mix of RO Mini for kind of like the messaging and Sonnet 3.5 for the actual coding. And I agree with you. 3.5 is an amazing model. I think what is most impressive about 3.5 is how kind of like it has sustained such a high regards throughout many months, right?
Yep.
Like if you look at a lot of those models, they came and go, right? Oh, this is a huge model, then a new one comes in and no one talks about that anymore. But 3.5 kind of like stuck in there. Like this has been consistently good throughout the year. And I mean, I bet that they're probably improving it behind the scenes.
There's one improvement. There's one, and it's still called 3.5, and we call it 3.6 sometimes. Yes, but you're right. It's been very consistent since then. Like it's like one improvement, and usually 4.0 was updated like 3 times since then. But yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely a chat model from Anthropic, and where's Opus is the question. Where's Opus? Well, next thing, before I get to reasoning, I still have like a bunch of questions for you. The next thing that I want to chat about is the markup of the brain of an agent, let's say, right? So there's maybe this visualization that I saw. I just want to talk to you about the different parts of an agent, and I want to talk about maybe like memory and tool use, like all of these things. What is there in the ecosystem of everything that like an agent has? And like long-term memory, short-term memory, would love for you to tell me in the beginning of 2025, a person that comes into an agents as a concept, what do they need to know? What is an agent like built out of? What are the different parts of an agentic system, of an agent, of a workflow? What are those things? And I know some of them, and I mentioned some of them. Would love to hear from you, like what those are and what do they look like?
Yeah, that's actually a great context. I'm gonna see if I can pull up some like visuals that might help us talk over some of this.
Yeah.
If not, I can try to draw something live. But to talk about it real quick, it starts simple, right? That's the thing. Conceptually, it starts simple because you have an LLM in the center that is going to basically work as this agent quote unquote brain. And you're going to be calling that LLM over and over. That part's pretty straightforward. Then you're going to give this LLM a task in order for it to perform, and you would expect it to give you an output, right? So it's gonna give you an output at some point. Now, that said, it never stops right there. So here, let me see if I can hack something together real quick. So you know that you're gonna have a task that you're gonna pass into this, and you know that you're gonna have an output. Now, on the process of doing that, your agent is going to need to not only use the LLM knowledge, but it's going to need to call external tools. So integrations, right? In CrewAI, we call those integrations tools. And these tools are going to be APIs, databases, reg systems, you name it. So all those are things that your LLM is going to be calling it. So this is usually how it starts to get a little more complex. Then what you might have is you might have something in here that is going to be kind of like a trigger, right? So something that will trigger this task that will kick off your agent. So that also adds an extra layer. Sometimes it's going to be
like a time trigger, for example.
A time trigger would be an easy one, but it can be kind of, for example, a new record in Salesforce, right? Or something like that.
Lead,
that would be
yeah,
kind
yeah.
of like. Then the other thing is you're going to probably have on the output area, you're going to have kind of like a destination. So something you want to send this data to. So for example, you might want to send something to your Salesforce or SAP or another system that you have. Now, during your execution, your agent's going to basically create artifacts, right? And you're going to store those somewhere. So in CrewAI, you're going to need memory. And in CrewAI, we offer a few different types of memory. You're going to have what we call long-term memory. So where you're going to store things that you're going to remember across many different executions. You also will have a short-term memory, things that are going to be more kind of like geared toward this one specific execution. And then we also have what we call an entity memory. And the entity memory basically records like definitions of things. So if it learns what is weights and biases, then it's not going to need to kind of like go over that again. It's always going to remember what is waves and bias. And there's a few extra things in here. For example, we can have like a pre-existing knowledge that we allow you to add to your agents and everything along that. So this covers memory. Now, this doesn't stop here. It got more complex, right? Between all those calls, you will need a caching layer. So what happens if your agents try to use the same tool and that tool is calling an API? For example, if it's Salesforce, you have a limits of requests. That's part of like their plans. So you want to have a caching layer so you're not calling those tools over and over again. And all this is one agent. But if you say, all right, this is now a crew, and I actually have multiple agents that are working in this. Now you're talking about, well, this memory needs to be shared across all these agents. This caching layer needs to be shared across all the agents. And that starts to add an extra layer of complexity as well. And then there's a few like smaller things. For example, you can have, as we mentioned, you're going to have some validators, right? Where you can basically say, hey, I want to add, for example, a programmatic validator in here. We call programmatic guardrails internally. So I want to add a programmatic guardrail to make sure that, for example, the output of my agent, I check all the links to make sure that the links return 200 and they are not hallucinating. So that would be a programmatic guardrail. And you might have a before hook and an after hook. Or if you're using Flow, you might have Python being executed before or after. So things can get very complex as you go towards more complex use cases. But I think high level, these would be the main components for you to start to think about.
Yeah, it gets very complex. Thank you for drawing this picture. I want to talk about the tools layer, because that seems to have been evolving fairly significantly, right? So like we got tool use June of 23, I believe, from OpenAI. We asked, I remember like significantly, we asked for the JSON output and they gave us tool use, function calling back then. And we were like, whoa, what is this? Like we wanted JSON calling. And since then, they're like, it was like a significant change because now models can give us functions back. And it was like, oh, this is like a very big thing. And then since then, we got instruction calling with tool use and then multiple tools at the same time, etc. obviously the whole thing with vector databases and RAG and now vector databases like implemented. What kind of like other tools do you envision that we're still lacking? I'll give you an example and some tools that are very exciting for folks. And this is just me asking, but also like saying as well, and kind of like talking to you as well. I recently heard that Stripe, for example, added like agents payments system. I recently heard that like Okta is starting to add authentication for agents, AI agents as well. So would love to hear from you some recent examples from folks who are not following this field of what are new capabilities in terms of like maybe APIs or agents that agents can now like tap into. And obviously, you know, folks who can code can put a server layer in between, have an API call, and basically do whatever. I'm talking more of like more ready-made tools that, you know, like MCP from Anthropic that allows an agent to call basically anything. Give us, from your experience, some of the newer things, like the Stripe payment one, like the Okta one. So, what can agents do in 2025 or will be able to do that they couldn't like a year ago?
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that. We're working with all these companies. We're talking with Okta, we're talking with Stripe. They basically put out this integrations with CrewAI to basically allow you to process payments and tap into their APIs with agents, and that is very interesting. Okta launched a few things, but I can tell you they're cooking some amazing things behind the scenes. That's very good to see. And there are other companies out there. I think what is happening, and honestly, if you think about it, it's so interesting what is happening with AI nowadays and agents specifically, is that the market's moving so fast that it's not waiting for its own protocols, right? So if you think about like browser use, for example, that is a big thing. Everyone can like freaks out and like, hey, agents are browsing the web and doing things. But if you think about it, it's so not optimal to have agents and AI interact with browsers the same way that we do. Yeah. Like rendering HTML using keyboard and mouse. They're very limited toward, like, the throughput's limited, the quality is limited. Is not the like the most optimal protocol for AIs and agents to be using computers and the internet, right?
The best way, the most succinct way to say this comes from Killian from Open Interpreter. Killian said, the web is human shaped. Yep. The web is for humans and it's human shaped. It's not agent shaped. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, I interrupted you. But this is like the best way that I heard that problem for agents like being said. The web is human shaped.
Your own point. It's human shaped. And the thing is, like, if we're given the time, I'm sure that people would figure out new protocols that would be optimal, right? Like, honestly, think that an agent needs to scroll a page is a little bit like, again, it's human shaped, as you said. Like, an agent wouldn't need that. They can see the whole page at once. So I think that what is happening here is AI and agents are moving so fast, they're not waiting from their protocols. But now that things are getting mainstream, we're seeing more and more companies deployed. We're seeing actual use cases. We're seeing ROI. There's real money flowing into this. Companies are now kind of like, they have to step up, right? Because like companies that are building agents, they need to integrate with Stripe. They need to integrate with the external systems. So a lot of these companies are kind of like taking the lead. And I honestly, very kudos to Stripe, like very impressed with the fact that they basically took the lead on this one and said, like, you know what, let's make it easier for people that are building agents to actually interact with our API. And since then launching it, we heard about a lot of different potentials around people being able to write, for example, support use cases that agents automatically now can call the Stripe APIs and see that person data, see that person transactions, see that person like cards declined or anything like that, and kind of like do a better supporting agent by doing that. So there's a lot of things that opening it up. That is said, it's super early days still, right? A lot of these companies out there, like they're still in what I'm talking about, the companies that are kind of like this big gateways for the information that other companies use. So Zendesk, Customer, Salesforce, HubSpot, like they're still figuring out how to navigate all this and what that business will look like with all these AI agents. But it's funny to see some of these companies stepping up and creating kind of like first class, kind of like entry points that people can use. I think we're going to see way more than that going into this year, and we ourselves are very excited about some of the partnerships that we're going to announce, including one now on January 6th that I can't get out just yet, but that's going to be very exciting.
Oh. So almost there, folks. 4 more days. Just for make sure to give Joao a follow. 4 more days, you're gonna see a partnership announcement. Very exciting. January 6th. But this leads me to the next question of wait, before the next question, I want to talk about like the other kind of capabilities and tool use that we didn't mention. Maybe shout out to some other friends of the pod that we should mention.
Yeah.
There's also code execution one. That E2B, for example, a great company that works on great folks as well. You guys should definitely check them out. E2B is giving basically a sandbox environment to every agent to run on and give them code execution. And we know that some agents, like the agent that pull your code, for example, need to run it to see whether or not like it executes. And that's like an amazing code. You don't want to run this in like in an open environment on your staging production to go and ruin things. Like you want a sandbox environment. You mentioned browser use case. So browser based, another great like friends of the pod as well, like some other API-able way to run, doing great things as well. What are some of the things that I don't know? Like I follow the space fairly, but you know, you're the expert. What are some of the things, like we talked about Stripe, we talked about authentication, obviously agents need to have access, etc. What about some coding stuff, for example?
Yeah, I gotta say the folks that you mentioned are amazing. I love E2B. I love browser base. Browser base is killing it. Honestly, it's so good. I love everything that they're doing up there. So I think there's other players that are coming into market. Exa is also doing pretty well with their new features. They're launching a few new features in terms of searching. They're also super interesting. So a lot of people kind of like using Exa to power agent searches compared to kind of like regular Google searches that what you would have historically. I think Google itself is trying to figure out how to handle searches now because they don't want to have their data scraped the same way. So it's a little weird, and I think that gives X kind of like an edge. I also love what they're doing in there. And then there's a few other things that we're seeing. For example, one thing that because we have such a global presence, what we're seeing on more heavily regulated countries is ability to filter out information as data leaves a country. That's another thing that not a lot of people are thinking about this, but it's quite a big problem. Like a lot of these countries out there, they have heavily legislation around data cannot leave the country. So you need to have kind of like and we have a feature and enterprise for that that basically abstracts away any PII and personal information as this data is getting out, and then re-injects as that's getting in. But that's another thing. Another thing that we're also seeing as well is in line with kind of like what Okta is doing. Is kind of like, all right, if these agents are going to be kind of like working for a company, they need to have not only kind of like IDs that you can like identify each and every single one of them, but they also need to have specific levels of access, right? So what kind of like level of access a certain agent will have, and then what kind of level of access the person running this agent needs to make sure that they can actually tap into the right data. So for example, if Alex and I work at the same company, if I run an agent, could it use my level of access to kind of like give a different answer? But if Alex does it, it uses a different level of access to like giving him a different agent. So those are kind of like some of the other things that we're seeing. Again, very like kind of like a kind of like production like an enterprise like needs that we're seeing out there. But overall, I think it's a lot of kind of like tapping into data and being able to do it in an effective manner. And the other thing as well is because there are so many companies, they're launching like agents, but in guarded ways. For example, Agent Force, where they're doing a lot, but it's everything locked up. Like how
Agent
you
Force is
interact
from Salesforce, right?
Yeah, from Salesforce, but it's only run on Salesforce environment. It's all like using the Salesforce data. So like a lot of these companies are like, well, I wanted my agents to interact with these agents, or for example, SAP. Like they are also working on kind of like agents things from their own. Like I wanted my agents to interact with my SAP agents. So I think some of these more traditional companies are basically guarding their agents strategy pretty heavily. What I think is not the right move here. I think AI has proven to flourish on open spaces. But that said, like I think that's going to be another thing that are going to need to step up as an ecosystem is figuring out collaboration between these platforms and the external world.
All right, so we talked about tools. I think there's a bunch of exciting tools. João, I have a few more questions for you. And then we're going to wrap up because I want to be mindful of your time. But a few more questions for you. You recently posted that you finalized removal of LangChain from Crew. And as far as I remember, last time we chatted, Crew was based on LangChain, or at least it was like on top of LangChain. And recently you removed LangChain completely. And I want to talk to you about why. I want to hear about why. Obviously, LangChain has its place. They have a competing framework, like so. I want to hear about you and your just considerations for removing it. How do you see LangChain's position in the ecosystem? They recently talked about being doing protocol. They're doing like state of agents as well. Would like to hear from you generally where that stands and the decisions for removing them from Crew as well.
Yeah. So funny enough, when I posted that tweet and that kind of like blew up, it was funny because the motivation that made me post it was because it was brought to my attention that people didn't know about it yet. But we actually removed LangChain months ago. But a lot of people were under the impression that we still use LangChain for a while. So early days when I started to build Crew as an open source framework, I remember looking around for the other frameworks that was around, and there was nothing that solved what I needed it for. The AutoGen was already around, but honestly, like I found it to be super complex. It was not kind of like clicking for me, and it was more conversational. And I was like, all right, this is not it. I remember loving ChatDev, but it was more of a researcher paper. It has kind of like a game-like UI. I was like, all right, this is not something that I can run in production. It's not something that I can host. In LangChain and Llama Index back then that have been kind of like the main like AI frameworks, more generalistic frameworks out there, they didn't have like specific kind of like agent solutions back then, right? They had all there were two boxes. They didn't have like a solutions for that specifically. So I remember that I decided to use LangChain for the agent executor. And then we can like start to grow the open source framework on top of that. But that started to become a problem because we had to override a lot of the LangChain executor because we had all those specific features that we wanted to support that we couldn't do it that way. So that was a lot of overriding, and that ended up being a problem for us because whenever we went to bump a version, then it would be stuck on kind of like having to rebase a lot of the things and changing a lot of the overrides, and sometimes override even further because methods, the helper methods that were being called like broke for whatever reason. So it was very hard for us to maintain that setup. And that was kind of like the main reason why we started to look into that. And there was also kind of like some customer conversations that got a little tricky. LangChain seems to be doing way better now, but like they had some issues with kind of like basically kind of like dependencies and security concerns from those dependencies, right? And a lot of those big enterprises, they run like security checks before using any software, and if they pick up something wrong, they're like, hey, like we can actually use this. So there was a mix of reasons, but I think maintenance was probably the main driver from the early days. Like, all right, this is gonna slow us down if we keep depending on this, and we are already using so little of it just because we overrode so much that we decide to just basically write our own from scratch.
I see. Alrighty, so I want to talk about the next thing because I think that we ended 2024. The last quarter of 2024 was all about reasoning. Was all about this like new test time compute scaling law that exploded from O1 getting announced at Dev Day in OpenAI, and then O3 getting announced like a week before we ended 2024, and shown incredible progress. And I brought you here, and thank you so much for coming on such short notice, dude. You're such a great sport, to talk about whether or not the next year is the year of agents. While also people are talking about whether or not the next year is the year of reasoning and test time compute, etc. And I want to hear from you. First of all, besides agents, you're very involved in AI. You're working in this. You have an AI startup that is extremely successful, and kudos to you as well. And many enterprises talk to you. How do you see the reasoning thing? What do you think about this? Would love to hear from you. That's number one. And number two, how do you see those combined? Because when you kind of talk about agents and reasoning, you talk about agents making decisions. Reasoning is very obviously the more power you give it, the better decisions, let's say, it makes, or the better reasoning about decisions it makes. A chain of thought is built in, so you don't have to prompt it for chain of thought. And would love to hear from you the connection of these two things as we go into 2025 with those new capabilities and tools.
Yeah. So let me start with the first part of our question, that is 2025, the year of agents. And I would say, hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
I can tell you that we signed more deals and closed more customers in the last 6 weeks than in the last few months. And we closed quite a bunch. And it's insane how fast things are moving. So I think 2025 is either going to be great for agents or insane. It's something in that range. But I think definitely 2025 will be the year where agents are going to basically be deployed more and more often. Now, about reasoning. Reasoning is, I think it's tricky. When O1 first launched it, and we had to adapt to support it because it was a different API, and we were actually seeing more hallucinations with O1 with the traditional models, because of the inner build kind of a reasoning. The agents that were powered by O1 would very often decide to use no tools and to not behave as you would expect, because they would try to get to the answers themselves, right? So that was something that we had to work around and change in order to support. And in the end, it worked out. You can use those models now. But I think latency is still a major concern for a lot of those use cases out there. And especially when you're using multi-agents, where you can break out complex tasks into kind of smaller things, and you can have one agent researching, another one writing, another one reviewing, and things like that. You're usually faster than running a full reasoning model, cheaper than running a full reasoning model, and honestly kind of works better in a lot of ways. So I think as those reasoning models get cheaper and faster, I think they're gonna find a place on the AI agents execution as kind of managers of other agents in a hierarchical fashion, or kind of planners for other agents to execute. But I think in the end of the day, if you're optimizing for as everyone should, what is the minimum that I can get away with? The smaller the model, the best you'll be, because the faster it will be, and that will probably be the cheapest that it will be as well. So I think the way that these models are going to fit, at least for now, is as they get cheaper and faster, they might fit as kind of more complex agents that are planning what's going to happen. And then there's smaller agents kind of go out doing kind of all the groundwork.
I see. So tell me about maybe the importance of speed of execution in the context of agents as well. So isn't it the case where you run a crew or a set of crews, or multiple agents running together, that the nature of execution is async anyway, right? So to an extent, depending on the agent, but to some extent, as far as I consider this, in an AI application, let's say it's a chat or something that the user sees, the UX is that the user experiences this right there. The user sits and expects an answer right there. So that would be like a chat agent, maybe that, the agent goes and reviews some RAG system, gets back, etc. A research agent, the agent that like goes and does something behind the scenes, that's more of an async agent. Is that speed of execution, doesn't that matter less? And by then, to an extent, you wanted to do the best logically sound job, the best reasoning job?
For most of the cases, yes. Especially if you're talking about internal automations, then yes. That said, there's a lot of agents that are being used for user-facing applications, right? For example, support and things like that, or procurement. In those, speed still matters. And even if it's something that doesn't necessarily have an interface that's voice or something like that, we have a few of those where speed like super matters. But there are use cases, for example, we have use cases where people are replacing very legacy OCR systems with agents. So there's not only data extraction now, but it's also classifying and kind of like doing certain things with this data. And the problem with the speed on that one is volume, right? Like if you're saying like, hey, I want to process 10 million documents a day, then you need these things to be fast anyway, even like if there's no like consumer facing kind of like on the other side, right? So there's like there are companies that we work with, especially kind of like on more traditional markets where you still have a lot of like mail, fax still and a few other things, where some of these agents they need to be executed super fast given the volume alone and the dynamics on scaling certain things horizontally versus scaling certain things vertically. So that is something that is top of mind. But we are seeing many agents that in the end of the day, like you might have a UI that is a chat, but then behind that you have 2 or 3 agents that are actually doing kind of like some of the groundwork. So when you're chatting with this chat, it might decide to call this crew of agents as a tool. So the chat will handle most of the things themselves, but depending on how it goes, then it goes out and actually kind of like do the thing. But to your point, yes, like speed in here is definitely secondary for most of the cases. Price, not as much.
Price, not as much. Okay. There's also the additional thing that I'm thinking of is that O1 with function calling just came out like 2 weeks before the end of the year as well. Like it was O1 preview and then the API wasn't even there. You had to like work around this like we used to do before. And then the actual function calling API came out, like in the mini dev day, in the day 7th of the 12 days of OpenAI. So I got to wonder like if that has been even tested. Question for you outside of agents. AI in general, like I'm assuming that you as I are very excited about this whole thing. What do you use in your personal life? What do you find exciting about AI? Tell us, because ThursdAI is all about positivity. Like we are countering doomerism.
Yes.
We're like, as you see, like the excitement is here. I would love to hear from you. How do you find, if you have time? Like I know that like, maybe CrewAI working late nights. What do you use maybe for coding? Obviously, like, give us like your personal kind of like tools, use cases, exciting things
Right.
about AI. Would love to hear from you. Like, what do you find exciting?
I love it. So I use a lot of Crew. That's obviously I build a lot of crews. One of the things that I like to do for crews that makes my life easier, and let me show you this, is we have this no code UI. And for folks that remember basically custom GPTs back in the day, this is kind of like a flavor of it, where basically you can chat your way into an automation. So I can like type anything that I want in here, like I want to automate, let me say something silly, automate a company in Richmond. And it's gonna basically help me kind of like create those agents and tasks on the fly. And you can say whatever you want, and it's gonna create a crew plan. And eventually you're gonna go to a UI. So this is one thing that I use a lot on the day to day, as you can tell by how many chats I have here in the left, on how I have been using this to basically create this crews and these agents very fast. But I also still love to code. I don't find much time to do it as I used to anymore, but I use Cursor. So I'm not a windsurf guy. I tried windsurf, but I like Cursor better. I gotta say, when Surf just didn't click for me, and with Cursor, I got so hooked into some of their what do you call it? Some of their shortcuts. And then that was kind of like that just became a no-brainer for me. So Cursor for sure. For image generation, I'm a die-hard Midjourney fan. So I still use Midjourney. I don't use Grok a lot. I should probably use it more. In terms
Grok with a
of
Q or Grok with a K?
Grok with a K. Grok with a Q I use very much.
Oh, yeah.
Grok with a K I don't use as much. I use a lot of Claude Sonnet 3.5 for coding is my go-to coding model, and GPT 4o for my regular chat with OpenAI. That's kind of like my go-to. Very rarely use Owen or anything else now. And let me think about it. There's probably more things that I'm using on a day-to-day basis that I really like, but I find myself using a lot of OpenAI, a lot of Sonnet, a lot of Cursor. And for Cursor, I also use some of the terminal, kind of like they have an internal terminal and they can generate code. And I use both their chat features, but also their agent features, what I really like as well. Um, but I think that is it in a nutshell.
I think
Yeah,
that's
I mean
plenty.
there's
Yeah.
there's more stuff, but like that's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Here's my kind of follow-up to this, and maybe two more questions, like deeper ones that not necessarily agent related. One agent related. You're often in San Francisco, but you're not based in San Francisco, as I'm not as well. You're working at a company that is building agents to some extent. Obviously with human integration, humans are taking care of overseeing the agents, so not a replacement necessarily. But there's a lot of people for whom this whole field of AI is very scary. A lot of people who don't understand this whole field. Where folks are following ThursdAI, for example, where folks are building companies in AI, for us, it's kind of obvious we follow everything. Many folks who don't follow, for them, this could be scary. Even taking further down the road to an extent, there's many folks who hate this whole field with like strong passion. You probably have met many of those online as well. Call them Luddites, call them haters, whatever you want. How do you see, have you encountered those folks online in terms of like you're building a company that essentially replaces at least some part human jobs to an extent, right? If we're talking about customer support, for example, that's some amount of human replacement that's built into this, right? Have you encountered those folks? What's your conversation with those folks like? Have you encountered? So I definitely have my personal perspective. Recently encountered a lot of hate online for like this one thing that I posted. I can talk to you about this. Would love to hear your just like general approach to how this, how we're in this environment where like many people are seeing this thing that comes at them and are scared, don't know how to deal with this. Maybe are scared about job replacement. Just would love to hear from you as a person who works at this. How do we think about this?
I love that. That's a good one. So one, let me start by saying one thing. I'm breaking the news for you first. My Owen got approved today. So I'm gonna be
Let's
yes.
go.
So I'm gonna be moving. I'm gonna move into the Bay eventually.
Let's go. Alien of extraordinary
Yeah.
able. Let's go.
Yes, I'm very
Congrats,
excited
man. I'm
because
very happy for you.
yeah, I'm happy because I don't mind traveling, but with a small kid, I want to make sure that I'm around family as much as I can. I already work like too many hours, and like not being around sucks. So it would be great to have family nearby now. Um, Now about jobs and people that are concerned about being replaced and everything about that. Alex, I'm gonna be completely honest with you, and I think everyone needs to have like a wake up call. That is, uh, we have very little control on what is going to happen in the future. People don't realize that. We have very little control on like what is going to happen. You might be crossing the street and you don't know what is going to happen. So you don't have control over things, right? So when I think about the future and what the future could be and all the different variations of this thing and how what it can come, I think about what are the things that I have control over. what are the things that I can actually change? Well, I would say for everyone and ourselves, you can decide what tools you're using today. That is within your control. And doesn't matter what the future will look like. I think you'll be better off by using these tools sooner than not using them at all or using them later. So if that is in your control, I would say absolutely use them. Get familiar with them, understand how you can deploy them into your day-to-day, how they can help you. Because honestly, I don't know. I don't know if AI is going to take certain jobs or create new jobs. No one can say that for sure. Like, we haven't seen this. Everyone is living through this for the first time. So I would say, think about the things that you actually know, the things that you actually have control over, and those are the things that you optimize for. Otherwise, like, there's nothing that you can do other than either feeling sorry for yourself or overhype yourself, what doesn't like bring any actual value.
I completely agree with this. Completely 100% agree with this. I wanted to hear like how your thought process, and have you met folks like this? Have you had those conversations outside of kind of the bubble? Like, obviously San Francisco is like in a crazy bubble, like, but outside you travel, you meet folks. I got asked in Ubers, like, hey, should my kid go and learn CS, computer science, or is it like too late, or is it unnecessary? Like, what do you have those conversations with folks like from they're not connected to this whole field?
I do, and even in family, right? Like, my father asked me the other day about this. They're like, "All right, what is happening here?" So it was a funny interaction, but yeah, I think like it honestly, everyone is not only curious but also has some level of fear about what this will look like. And yeah, if you're living inside like a big tech community where everyone's kind of like basically talking about how this is going to be awesome and awesome, it's hard for you to kind of like see why people would be concerned. But for people that don't have the skills or the understanding about how AI systems work or what they can actually do, how good they are, and how fast they're improving or how slow they're improving, like it's hard for them to understand how they should be thinking about this, if they should be fearful or not. It's very clear to me that AI will have a social, already has a social impact on communities and society. So I think this is going to be a more common theme on elections. It's going to be a more common theme on conversations and on communities in general. And there's going to be things that we're going to need to adapt and change for sure. So I have met some of these people and I go through the same. People in Uber ask me all the time if I mention that I work with AI, and they're like, oh, so how should I be thinking about this? And everyone's kind of like just trying to crack the code a little bit. I would say education is great. So if you want to like learn something new, you should definitely do it. No one can take that from you. Honestly, you can always use this one way or another. So I think there's value on that. And if anything, AI makes it easier to some extent for you to learn a few things. So if you want to learn CS, I would say go for it.
Yeah, the barrier of entry has never been lower to a thing than right now. That's absolutely true. Right. Last question from the audience, I think. And I think for you, please, this is a greenfield. Not many people are as well positioned as you to answer this question is, what are some of the shortcomings of agents right now? And what are some of the, how should I say, things that need to be improved in the world of agents, maybe in the world of AI, to answer those shortcomings so that agents will take over even more in 2025? What are the big missing glaring like holes in this whole thing? What do we need to still solve? Would love to hear from you about those things. Obviously, you're in the know.
There's a few things. So for example, we mentioned how things are moving so fast that protocols are not sticking. Like everyone's trying their own thing. Anthropic did amazing, but like it's too early for us to claim that as the winner. So it's, there's no protocols yet, and that makes it harder for you to figure out integrations at a scale, right? And integrations is what unlock a lot of these values. At the end of the day, agents that cannot like act on systems or pull information out of systems, like they're not that useful. So those integrations are definitely a point of concern. A lot of times when we're working with customers, or what we see in the open source community as well, and people that are using CrewAI, is this idea that you spend sometimes more time working on these integrations than on the agents themselves, because the agents, you can, like, CrewAI makes so that simple that you can get something going, but then the integration, if you're doing like something hard, for example, Salesforce and SAP, we have a lot of those pre-made by now, but I remember like a few months ago, like those were like main areas of concern. And I think going in 2025, the more integrations, the better, right? So how we're going to crack the code on the integrations, like no one wants to be building 100 different versions of the same integration. So either there's going to be a way to kind of like basically rule them all, and what would that look like? So I think integrations are definitely one thing. And the other thing that I think gets in the way right now is a lot of like, the more value you get is a linear correlation with how much autonomy these agents have, right? So in a perfect world where the agents never make any mistakes and you're comfortable with they doing the whole thing by themselves, the more value you will get, because you don't need people overseeing it. You can run them very fast in a loop. There's no kind of like people that need to interject in the process. So the more autonomy and the more accuracy, the more value. The problem is there's no 100% accuracy with this. At least not for now, maybe never. But right now, there's no 100% accuracy. So when you think on those super like immense use cases that could be so value, or those use cases that are very kind of like mathematical, like accounting, right? Like those are things that you can't crack just yet without having like heavy human in the loop and things like that. I would love to understand. Maybe we don't crack the code on that, but if we think, or if we can all agree on a way to measure those and to improve those and to assess those, maybe that unlocks those use cases with a certain degree of kind of like a less human in the loop that brings even more value. So I would say that's another thing that will also be top of mind. And in the end of the day, at least from the CrewAI business point of view, yes, AI agents is a huge piece, but when you're talking about bringing this into enterprises, into bigger companies, a lot of the features are not AI related at all. So I think there's a lot of us to do in that as well that I think would be very interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot of enterprises are lagging by definition. Like they're still like 6 to 12 months behind the curve, and they need to be brought in. And a lot of this is explanation. I know for us, like teaching is a lot. Like we sell a tool about observability evaluation. I have to come in and teach what evaluations are, to then say, hey, let me tell you about what evaluations are and why you will need this once you start needing this. And then, oh, by the way, we have a tool. Like teaching is a process as well. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
João, I want to tell you a huge thank you for being an incredible sport. Folks don't know, I DM'd you like this morning or last night, and you answered this morning. Incredible. You're a very busy CEO of a very successful company, CrewAI. Folks, this is your second appearance on ThursdAI. You came a year ago. It's been incredible, just absolutely incredible to see how you took an open source thing that you started coding and then took this to like a whole company with many, I don't know how many folks are now employed at Crew?
Not coding agents. I don't have a hard number because there are people joining every week or so right now, but we're past over 25 now. I think
it's just
like
absolutely incredible to see your rise and how well the company is growing. So I consider you obviously a friend, but a friend of the pod as well. Thank you so much for coming, folks. Give João a follow, give CrewAI a try if you haven't yet, which you should. If you're an enterprise and you want to build agents, please definitely build agents. We don't have time because we're at the 2-hour mark exactly for other questions, but you know, you're on X, so I'm sure that follow-up questions you can take if you have time between codes. Happy New Year, brother. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for incredible, in-depth very, very much expert take on the year of agents. And I wish you all the luck and success in the world. And we see you out there. Killing it as always. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. And yes, looking forward to be back maybe a year from now, and we can talk about
hopefully we'll see you in less than a year. And congrats on the baby, and congrats on the 01 and everything. Cheers, man.
Cheers,
everyone.
Cheers.
And everyone, thank you so much for joining ThursdAI for the first edition of 2025. It's been incredible, and we'll see you here next week. And hopefully we'll have way more news as well. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you here next week. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.